I found my husband's secret family during a routine grocery trip. It was a Saturday morning like any other. I was at the grocery store pushing my cart through the aisles when I saw him. My husband Warner was standing in the produce section holding a basket of apples. But he wasn't alone. Next to him was a woman I'd never seen before. And between them was a little girl no more than 5 years old calling him Daddy. My heart stopped. I stood there frozen as the scene played out in front of me. Warner laughed at something the woman said, his hand resting on her lower back in a way that was far too familiar. The little girl tugged on his sleeve asking for a banana, and he smiled down at her like she was the center of his world. I felt like I was watching a movie. This couldn't possibly be real, but it was, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I didn't confront him there. I couldn't. Instead, I turned around and left my cart in the middle of the aisle, rushing out of the store before anyone could see me cry. By the time I got home, my mind was racing. How long had this been going on? Who was that woman? And who was that little girl? Warner came home a few hours later acting completely normal. He kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to scream to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I smiled and said it was fine, but inside I was falling apart. That night, while Warner was asleep, I went through his phone. I'd never done anything like that before, but I had to know the truth. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. Texts, photos, even a shared calendar with the woman from the store. Her name was Julie, and the little girl, her name was Bina. According to the messages, she was Warner's daughter. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. Warner was already gone, leaving a note on the kitchen counter saying he had an early meeting. I knew better now. I checked his shared calendar and saw that he was scheduled to have breakfast with Julie and Bina at a diner across town. My hands shook as I got dressed and headed out the door. I arrived at the diner just as they were being seated. I sat in my car, watching through the window as Warner laughed with Julie and helped Bina cut her pancakes. It was like watching a perfect little family, one I wasn't a part of. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, and deep aching sadness. How could he do this to me, to us? I waited until they left the diner before following them. Warner dropped Julie and Bina off at a small house on the other side of town, then drove to work as if nothing was wrong. I sat outside the house for hours, trying to figure out what to do. Finally, I worked up the courage to knock on the door. Julie answered, her expression shifting from surprise to suspicion when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone guarded. I took a deep breath. "I'm Warner's wife," I said, my voice trembling. Julie's eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. The house was cozy, filled with photos of Julie, Bina, and, to my horror, Warner. There were pictures of them at the park, on vacation, even at what looked like a birthday party. It was like stepping into an alternate reality, one where Warner had a whole other life. Julie offered me a cup of coffee, and we sat down at the kitchen table. "How long have you known Warner?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Julie hesitated, then sighed. 5 years, she said. "We met at work. He told me he was divorced." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. 5 years. That meant Warner had been living a double life for almost half of our marriage. "What about Bina?" I asked, my voice breaking. Julie looked down at her hands. "She's his daughter," she said quietly. "He's been a part of her life since the day she was born." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd just learned. Warner wasn't just having an affair. He had a whole other family, a family he'd been hiding from me for years. As I sat at Julie's kitchen table, my mind raced with questions. How had Warner kept this secret for so long? How had I not noticed? But before I could ask anything else, Julie spoke again. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice hesitant. She got up and left the room, returning a moment later with a folder. Inside were legal documents, custody agreements, child support payments, even a will. My hands shook as I flipped through them. According to the papers, Warner had been financially supporting Julie and Bina for years. He'd even listed Bina as his beneficiary in case of his death. He told me you knew, Julie said, her voice filled with guilt. He said you two had an arrangement, that you were okay with it as long as he didn't bring it up around you. I felt a surge of anger. That's a lie, I said, my voice trembling. I had no idea any of this was happening. Julie looked shocked. I'm so sorry, she said. I had no idea he was lying to both of us. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the enormity of Warner's betrayal. Then Julie said something that stopped me cold. There's something else, she said. Warner has been talking about leaving you. He said he wants to be with me and Bina full-time. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Warner wasn't just hiding a secret family. He was planning to leave me for them. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him, to scream and cry and demand answers. But another part of me knew I needed to be smart about this. If Warner was capable of lying to me for years, what else was he capable of? I decided to gather evidence over the next few weeks. I documented everything. Texts, photos, financial records. I even hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Warner's double life. What I found was shocking. Not only was Warner supporting Julie and Bina, but he'd also been funneling money from our joint accounts into a secret savings account in Julie's name. But the biggest bombshell came when the investigator uncovered something I never expected. Warner had another child, a son, living in a different state with another woman. It turned out Julie and Bina weren't his only secret family. Armed with all the evidence, I decided it was time to confront Warner. I waited until he came home from work one evening, his usual cheerful self, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I sat him down at the kitchen table and placed the folder of documents in front of him. What's this? He asked, his tone light but his eyes already wary. Open it, I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside me. He hesitated, then flipped through the papers. His face went pale as he realized what he was looking at. Where did you get this? He demanded, his voice rising. I hired a private investigator, I said. And I talked to Julie. I know everything, Warner. About her, about Bina, about your son in another state. I know about the money you've been stealing from us. I know it all. Warner stared at me, his expression a mix of shock and panic. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he started to explain, or rather to make excuses. It's not what you think, he said. I never meant to hurt you. I got in over my head and didn't know how to get out. I didn't buy it. You didn't know how to get out? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You've been lying to me for years, Warner. You've been living a double life. No, a triple life. And you didn't think that would hurt me. He tried to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but I wasn't having it. You don't get to apologize, I said. You don't get to act like the victim here. You made your choices, and now you're going to live with the consequences. I told him I was filing for divorce and that I intended to take him for everything he had. He tried to argue, to convince me to give him another chance, but I was done. I packed a bag and left that night, staying with a friend while I figured out my next steps. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Warner fought me every step of the way, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, I got the house, the majority of our savings, and full custody of our kids. Warner was ordered to pay child support and alimony, but I knew it would never be enough to make up for what he'd done. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, but the emotional scars took much longer to heal. Warner tried to stay in touch, claiming he wanted to be a part of our kids' lives, but I couldn't trust him. How could I after everything he'd done? I set strict boundaries, allowing him supervised visits, but nothing more. Julie reached out to me a few times, apologizing for her role in the mess. She admitted she'd had no idea Warner was married when they first got together, and by the time she found out, she was already too deep. I didn't blame her, not entirely anyway. Warner was the one who had lied to both of us. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. I went back to school, earning a degree in counseling so I could help others going through similar situations. It was therapeutic, in a way, turning my pain into something positive. My kids were my rock throughout it all. Their resilience and love gave me the strength to keep going. It's been 5 years since that day in the grocery store, and while the pain hasn't completely gone away, it's gotten easier to live with. I've learned to trust again, both in myself and in others. I've even started dating, though I'm taking it slow. Warner, on the other hand, hasn't fared as well. His lies caught up with him, and he lost not just me, but Julie and his other family as well. He's alone now, and while part of me feels sorry for him, I know it's a bed he made for himself. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you can't control what other people do, but you can control how you respond. I chose to take my pain and turn it into strength, and in doing so, I found a new sense of purpose. This experience taught me that life is unpredictable, and sometimes the people you trust the most can betray you in ways you never imagined. But it also showed me how strong I am, how resilient we all can be when faced with adversity.